Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining in today. We ready to start, Bhante?
Yes, Dan. Yes.
Today, we continue on our Zen monthly theme. And last time I had started on the famous bull herding pictures, the taming of the bull. Today, we're very, very honored and privileged to have Venerable Daizan Roshi, who is an English Zen master who has trained in the Zen tradition for many, many years. He first started monastic training in 1989 in the Soto Zen tradition, and then having trained in that tradition for many years and receiving Dharma transmission, he then went off to Japan and trained with a very famous master there, Zen master Shinzan Miyamai, who is founder of the Zendo Kyodan lineage. And there he underwent very traditional monastic training with his Zen master for many, many years. After his full training and his Dharma transmission, which is he was given permission by his teacher to teach, and he's a Zen master in his own right, he came back to Britain, and he has been teaching and leading retreats and doing mindfulness and also yoga training. Venerable Daizan Roshi has his own center in Camberwell, southeast London. And interesting to note that Venerable Daizan was a very successful scientist in the pharmaceuticals industry, and he gave that all up at an early age to pursue the Zen training. And another interesting note to know about him is when he came back to Britain in 2007, in the summer of 2007, he undertook a traditional pilgrimage that they do in Japan and India and Sri Lanka. He did a traditional pilgrimage in full monk's robes and the famous Zen monk hat, and he went all the way from the southern tip of England, from the Isle of Wight to the northern tip of Scotland, Cape Wrath. It is an almost 800-mile journey he completed by foot, living only on alms round and whatever he was provided with on that journey. Quite an achievement, and he met many interesting characters, and quite a few of them have become his students and have been with him for many, many years. He also has a few books out. I would urge people to check out his website, zenways.org. And I think I've gone on long enough, so I'll hand over straight away to Venerable Daizan Roshi. Once again, we're most grateful to him. He's a very busy man with lots of teaching responsibilities, and he's the director of Zenways.org. So we're very, very grateful to have Venerable Daizan with us today. So please kindly take over. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. So, my teacher in Japan was based in a little village in rural Japan in the mountains. People come to him very frequently from the village and from the surrounding area. And many of these people weren't particularly learned or sophisticated, but frequently they would have problems in life. And in the room where he would meet the guests, the people who wanted to consult with him, he had a scroll which showed this series of pictures, the ox or bull herding pictures. And he would frequently use it as a way to help them make sense of what they were going through. And so this is the context that I learned about, really, this series of pictures and the way it helps us to sort of make sense of where we are on our spiritual journeys. So if we bring up the pictures, all of them together, perhaps, would that work to start with, Bhante? Well, this is the first one. Lovely. All right. So the situation, here we are, we have them all together. So this would be the sort of thing that my teacher would use to point out to people different stages, as it were, or different points on their path. Now, we live in a situation right now here in the Western world, here in the UK, where probably more people are practicing meditation, mindfulness, developing a sort of an inner cultivation process than has ever happened in history. And one of the effects of this is that, as you probably know, much of it is coming from a sort of a medicalized background and model. And our conventional medical model, as we have it really in the Western world, is essentially feel bad, take the pill or the treatment, feel better. And we're seeing more and more people jump into this inner cultivation, feeling bad, engaging in the practice, and feeling worse. And this has caused something of a crisis, really, in this field. People don't have a proper roadmap. And one of the things that I saw with my teacher, and I heard of in other contexts in Japan, is the ox herding pictures or the bull herding pictures is really used as a roadmap. And because it's a series of pictures, everybody can sort of make some kind of sense of it, even if you're not a very good reader. A lot of the Zen texts in Japan are in very old Japanese or in Chinese, not very accessible to the regular people. But a series of pictures, that's something we can all kind of work with. So how does it work? Well, so this first one we're in here, we have our cowherd, our young boy who's lost his ox. He's lost his bull. So what is the bull? Well, you could say that the bull is really perhaps his connection with life itself, the forces of life, the actual reality of life. He's lost touch, as it were. He's got a sense that there's something missing. And he's actually not only sensed that something's missing, he's not only got that sense of what we could call dukkha, perhaps, or stress, but he's actually doing something about it. He's searching. You can see him there kind of looking left and right. So in terms of our spiritual unfolding, in terms of our journey, this stage is really where we start to actually practice. We're actually not only recognizing that life is not all it could possibly be, there's not only a sense of unrealized potential, but we're actually doing something about it. We're actually engaging in the practice. We're looking around. Now, in this searching for something missing, and obviously it's an inner search, primarily in terms of our contemplative context, that sense of starting to look more closely. Sometimes this can, as it were, bring things into sharp focus. Sometimes it can be almost like, it can feel like things become hyper real. Colors can become more intense. Things can seem more real than they were. And occasionally somebody thinks, or I've encountered people who think that they've actually reached the end of the journey. This is it. When actually here they are at step 1 of the 10 steps. So one of the beauties of having a series of pictures to navigate by this is it stops us from, as it were, finishing our journey too early. It stops us from, as it were, getting caught at some stage along the way. Step 1, we're recognizing that there's something missing and we're actively looking for that. There's a famous Zen master from Japan from the 14th century called Dogen, who has a saying, to study Buddhism is to study the self. And this is the beginnings, this sense of looking, this sense of studying the self. But obviously this is just the beginning. So then through this looking more deeply, more intensely, our second picture, our second stage opens up. So, Bhante, if we can go on to our second one. Thank you so much. So, these are real masterpieces. This particular version. There are many versions of the ox herding or bull herding pictures. Some in which the bull starts off black and gradually becomes white as the series goes on. In this series, this stage here, he's actually seeing the footprints of the ox or the bull. It's not so easy to see in the picture. You've got to look pretty closely, but that's perhaps deliberate by the artist, that we start to see the footprints, the evidence of the ox, if you like. But we have to look carefully in order for that to become visible. So what are the footprints of the ox? Well, you could see it as traces of the past, the prints of the past, of what's gone before. When we look within, when we start to, as it were, confront our moment by moment reality, the arising and passing of the processes of life, a lot of what we start to see is the stuff of the past. What's been left behind by our previous choices, by our karma, and this can manifest in a physical sense of physical misalignments and discomforts, this kind of thing. It can arise in terms of emotional stuff, memories, and so on. And for most of us, most of the left behind residues, the prints left by the ox or by the bull, are of the tough stuff, the difficult things, the things that we weren't able or willing to deal with and process from the past. And so this stage, as it were, this second stage of our spiritual journey can be pretty unpleasant. It depends. Different people have different histories. Some of us have less, if you like, prints from the past. Some of us have a lot. And but by and large, it's the unprocessed stuff, the unlived life that we find in evidence in this stage. Now, people, as I mentioned, are these days very frequently embarking on this journey without much of a roadmap. So they perhaps have been feeling something missing. They start to practice and now they feel worse. So surely the process must be going wrong. Maybe they're not suited to meditate. Maybe this practice is ill-conceived or badly put together. Or maybe they just don't have the right orientation. Maybe this is things going right rather than things going wrong. And it's one of the sad things that people frequently at this stage, when they start to see the evidence of the past, the prints of the ox, they give up. Or they might continue the forms of practice, but that intense self-confrontation that has brought them to this stage begins to stop. They start to slide this introspection, this confrontation with the self. So, but if we know that seeing the prints of the ox is actually the second stage of the journey and things going right, then we can, as it were, safely get through this stage without worrying too much and without, as it were, investing in the fact that things might be a little bit disharmonious here, a bit unpleasant here. If we keep going if we allow the stuff to arise and pass without holding on, without pushing away, we're on to our next stage. So here's our third stage, where our ox herd boy catches a glimpse of the ox. You can see the ox is already disappearing out of view, but he's seen the tail. And this really corresponds to a phase in practice where things suddenly sort of come together. Okay, maybe it's been a bit rough, a bit bumpy. Maybe we've been feeling emotionally raw. Sometimes physically, things can feel quite rough. I often use with my students the image of a detox. If you've ever been on one of those diets where you just have lemon juice and water for a week or that sort of thing, you feel pretty rough while things are clearing, but then marvelous afterwards. And this is, for many people, this first glimpse is things suddenly becoming marvelous. It's like, okay, it works. We come face to face with the full glory of life, if you like. We start to see things as a kind of a aliveness, a kind of a freedom, a kind of an exhilaration even. There can be a lot of energy in the body at this time. There can be a sense that we can meditate for hours in some cases. Some people can comfortably sit all night without any worries. And many people at this stage become convinced that this must be it. This is it. Liberation, enlightenment. Here I am. I made it. I'm, the most enlightened thing since sliced bread. Unfortunately, quite a lot of people can get snagged at this stage. And yet here we are, stage 3 of the 10-step journey. We just caught a glimpse of something. And this glimpse, this often very beautiful or sometimes peaceful kind of moment, is simply that, an experience. As we all know, in coming to face ourselves, coming to face reality in a meditative practice, what we learn more than anything else is that thoughts come and go. Feelings come, they have a duration, and they go. Experiences come and go. And the problem with the untutored student at this phase is this experience of something wonderful, something glorious, something really harmonious and working right is just that. It's an experience. And experiences are fine, but if we, as it were, plant our flag in an experience, we have a problem. They use an image in Zen. I frequently heard my teacher use this, where you have a cup of milk. And day 1, your cup of milk is delicious, nutritious. You could give it to someone, you can drink it yourself. Day 2, if you hang on to it, it's kind of okay, probably. Maybe just beginning to turn, but probably still all right, probably still safe to drink. Day 3, already getting a little bit questionable. Day 4, 5, 6, before long, you've got mold growing on it. It's turning blue. You're getting a weird kind of fur. Same with experiences. If we simply have the experience, if we simply drink the milk, if you like, it's fine. There's no problem. But when we hang on to an experience, even a very beautiful and glorious one like this, then we've got a problem. We've got a problem because experiences are time-bound, and everything that's time-bound has an arising, has a passing away. There's no refuge within the world of arising and passing away. And so the ox herding pictures can, if you like, help us to be a little bit smarter in navigating our journey and not getting caught by experiences, even seemingly very exhilarating or beautiful or peaceful or meaningful ones. So if we don't get stuck here, and unfortunately many spiritual teachers do, if we don't get stuck here, if we continue with the journey, if we're able to, as it were, let go this experience as we do all others, then our next phase or stage opens up. So here, our cowherd boy has got a hold of the bull. He's got a tether around the bull. Now, this phase of practice is a bit like the second phase. When we see the footprints of the ox, when we see the traces of the past in our own bodies and minds, and if you like, the suffering that's present within them, that's something of a foretaste to this stage where typically we get the full force of our, if you like, impulses towards, well, towards good and towards ill, towards wakefulness and towards unwakefulness. Our bull here is kicking around at full power. And for many of us, it can seem like a real rodeo at this stage. The Buddha himself, I believe, there is a sutta in which he uses this image of taming a bull. And probably that's the original source, I guess, for these pictures. Now, this stage here varies a little bit from person to person. Some of us have a relatively placid bull, as it were. There's maybe a certain amount of kicking and pulling, but some of us have a real bucking bronco. There can be really a lot of stuff that arises. So in our meditative experience, we're basically coming face to face with, if you like, the full force of the instinctual drives within the human frame, the drives towards survival, the drive towards reproduction, and the twisted up versions of both of these drives, and a number of others as well. Now, the thing about it is, those of us who have a nice, relatively placid bull, we can pass through this stage a little bit more smoothly, perhaps, a little bit more gracefully than the others. But those who have a rough bull to deal with, when they do go through all this, all of that raw life energy becomes available for their life going forward. So although this phase in the journey can be very rough indeed for some people, it's extremely worthwhile going through. Now, the thing about it is, at this stage, we've already had a glimpse of how things can be. Here, it can get very rough. There can be, well, we have in some versions of the story of the Buddha's own meditative journey under the tree, experiences of anger arising, fear arising, desire arising, all the kind of forces of life. And that's very much what each one of us faces. Now, it can be very tempting to want to give up at this stage. And many people do. Many people find it just really hard or too rough, too difficult. Now, that's a shame. And one of the difficulties around giving up at this stage is it's almost like we can't, at this point, completely ignore what's happened up to this point. Even if we stop our practice, usually, for many people at least, some of this stuff from the past, some of these forces continue to arise, our life can feel a little bit out of kilter, or for some people, considerably out of kilter. There's a famous saying of Winston Churchill's that when you find yourself in hell, the best thing to do is to keep on walking. And that's very much the case for people who get to this stage. It can be very rough. It's very helpful to have a teacher at this stage. It's very helpful to have fellow travelers, particularly fellow travelers who have been through this, who can, just by their presence, assure you that this doesn't necessarily go on forever, that there is only so much suffering that you're carrying around, because it can seem that we're dealing with something that's much bigger than ourselves here. The bull can seem very powerful, can seem quite threatening, can seem quite rough. When I was researching this for one of my books, Practical Zen, a few years ago, I looked at some videos of American-style rodeos where they're kind of going through this stage. And in a rodeo, you only have to sit on the bull for 8 seconds in order to be kind of in the running, as it were. Our meditators, in some cases, are going through this phase over, well, it can be relatively brief. We run a retreat that runs for 64 hours, in which we take people basically on a journey through these stages. But in many cases, particularly this phase, can be somewhat prolonged, can last for months, even potentially some years, in which there can be painful feelings, physical disharmonies, even in some cases there can be physical symptoms which can seem rather like symptoms of ill health. People can feel very drained of energy, or their energy very out of whack. Sometimes people get joint pains, headaches, digestive complaints, various things. And it's basically a matter in dealing with them of letting this stuff arise and letting this stuff pass away without holding on to it, without, as it were, hitching our wagon to it, and without pushing it away. Now, that's not easy to do, but I guess the reason that most people walking through the world are not at least somewhat enlightened, if you like, is because they'd almost rather do anything else than face themselves. This is tough. It's tough work. My teacher used to say this is work for spiritual adults. And the amazing thing about it is that we can do it. And people like the Buddha, when he was sitting under the tree by himself, effectively with no roadmap, was able, through courage, clarity, and, presumably a lot of preparation from the past and the distant past, was able to go through this and, as it were, blaze a way for the rest of us. So it's been done before, and it's being done by people to this day. It's a doable thing, although it can be bumpy, it can be rough. But if we do that, if we allow things to come and go, not holding on, not pushing away, then our next stage can open up. So here we can see the boy and the bull are now aligned. The bull has, as it were, become tamed. The bull has now come to trust the boy. Our previous phase, in which the bull is pulling away from the boy, is resisting, fighting, struggling against the boy, could be a little bit like if you imagine our bull here has been locked up in a stable or a shed for some period of time. And then somebody opens the stable door and out comes the bull, rather like these bulls in these rodeos. Of course, it wants to kick, to pull, to get free, to actually, you know, stretch itself out and find its feet and so on. And the boy has been through that stage with the bull. He hasn't locked the bull back in the stable again, nor has he run away. He's stayed with the bull. When suffering from the past, what they call in Japanese jike, which I think is the Pali vasana, these kind of, if you like, stuff from the past, when it's allowed to come, to be seen, to be known, to release, when that happens, when enough of that happens, then a kind of a conversion process goes on. In terms of the bull here, in terms of that sort of raw life energy, it starts to realize that we, if you like, as the ox herding boy, aren't the enemy. We're not trying to, as it were, imprison the bull any further. We're not trying to harm the bull. We are actually starting to, as it were, make friends with the bull, and the bull makes friends with us. These forces, even the forces of aggression, even the forces of lust in some of its extreme forms, none of these in themselves are pure evil. Now, they can get very twisted up, and in this stage, in this previous stage of practice, we're allowing them to untwist. And so, for example, when you go to a properly laid out Buddhist temple in Japan, it's laid out in the shape of a human body. And the gateway, the entrance, is left and right of them, within the main gate are these two very fierce figures. You've possibly seen pictures of these kind of muscle men with very fierce faces. They're often huge, 2 or 3 times the size of a normal human, with Schwarzenegger, you know, muscle-bound bodies. And essentially, they're there in the gateway. They're the first figures that you meet. What they're showing is that within the human structure, within the human body, even pure aggression has a place. Where is its place? Well, these two guys are standing there at the gateway. They're rather like the bouncers of the temple. They're there to keep everyone safe, like bouncers would be in a nightclub or somewhere like that. You want the nastiest, fiercest guys to, as it were, protect everybody, to keep them safe from each other and to keep them safe from outsiders. So there's nothing here that needs to be, as it were, cut off or thrown away or shut back in the stable again. But these forces need to be allowed to, as it were, untwist, to liberate. And when they do, then the bull and the boy are able to make friends. They begin to align. They begin to be, as it were, going along the same path. So in terms of our practice, this alignment starts to happen when we reach a sort of a condition of equanimity within our meditative work. All of these forces, if you like, these emotions, these physical feelings, these memories, these sensations, they all are allowed to arise and pass without, as it were, identifying with them. We don't buy into them anymore. We're not fighting against them. We're not buying into them. This disillusionment, if you like, or disidentification allows this condition of equanimity to arise. We're in a stage of equanimity when angry feelings can arise and pass, blissful feelings can arise and pass, and we treat them both exactly the same. We don't hold on, we don't push away. When that equanimity starts to become ours, the boy the bull are beginning to align. And when they begin to align like this, then our next stage opens up. So here, the convergence of the boy and the bull has got to the point where the boy and the bull are together. Whoops, we've gone back again. Here we are, our boy and our bull together. And not only that, their rapport is such that the boy is able to play his flute and he's not even watching where they're going. He's able to trust the bull to the point where he's not even having to pay too much attention. The boy and the bull are kind of converging. They're going from pulling in opposite directions to aligning, to going the same way, to now the boy and the bull together, the boy riding on the bull. In this stage, our practice becomes much more harmonious, much more smooth, much more peaceful. Now, it can be that this stage again, people feel is the end of the journey. Now, this is picture 6 of the 10. So we're certainly not at the end of the journey yet. But the fact that typically things become a lot more peaceful here, a lot more harmonious. There's a kind of a quality of ease, a quality of naturalness about our inner work, about the scenery of our inner journey, can mean sometimes that people mistake this for the end. They, as it were, engage with this or plant their flag on this as it. But no, there's still further to go. This convergence, this coming together of the boy and the bull, of, if you like, you and reality, still have further to, as it were, integrate. Now, at this stage here, our 7th picture, the bull has disappeared. So the boy and the bull have come together to this, to at this stage, that the bull is no longer visible. It's not that the bull has run away again. The boy and the bull have come together to the point where they can't be seen anymore. The bull can't be seen. So, for example, one of my teachers used to describe meditation practice, the inner work, particularly the work with a question, as a kind of almost like a love affair. And you can see the boy and the bull as almost like a love affair, where they're approaching each other, they're kind of connecting, they're getting closer and closer. Now, the conclusion of any love affair, or a successful love affair, I guess, is the embrace. Once there's the embrace, you're so close to your beloved that you've lost perspective. You can't see them anymore. Similarly, here, the boy and the bull are so integrated that the bull becomes invisible. The boy and the bull are one. And again, this oneness can seem, well, frequently when people experience this, when things come together like this is frequently quite a brief stage. In some cases, it can even just be for a few seconds. But the amazing thing about it is when we become one with the bull, when we become one with any one thing, we become one with everything. We become one with the universe, if you like. And here the boy he's just, as it were, at home in the universe. But this, again, is not the end of the journey. This is only our 7th stage. And as I say, typically this sort of condition of oneness, sometimes it's called a state of wonder. There's a beautiful poem by William Blake in which he has a clod of clay speaking. And the clod of clay says, I ponder and I cannot ponder, yet still I live and love. That describes this stage quite nicely. It's like we're in a almost a kind of a stupor. My teacher, Zen Master Shinzan, his first name as a monk was Shugu, which in Japanese means preserving stupidity. In this stage, we become like that. We become kind of stupid, separate, or kind of not holding ourselves apart. But this is not the end of the journey. And when we come into this, as it were, oneness, this non-separateness, this great wonder, if you like, this great folly, you could call it too, then something else happens. So we have almost the symbol of Zen here, the empty circle. I got one right here behind me that my teacher did. So this phase of practice, or this stage of practice, is kind of like a sort of a reset, a bit like when your computer does a reset. In Zen, they call it the Great Death, which I tend not to use myself because it tends to scare people a bit. It's almost like the lights blink off and then blink on again. There's a kind of a discontinuity. Typically, it's pretty rapid, very, very fast. But nevertheless, there's a definitive kind of disappearing and reappearing. And because everything disappears, you disappear, the ox disappears, the boy disappears, everything, the whole universe disappears. There's nothing you can say about this stage. It's literally a discontinuity. And so Zen depicts it by an empty circle because there's really nothing to be said about it. But nevertheless, it's a kind of a switch point, if you like, a shift of gears, a discontinuity. Normally lasts a moment, but then from here, our next phase opens up. So then in this phase, I think the verse that goes with it is something like the mountains are green and the waters are blue. It's like a kind of a sense of a rebirth, a new being in a new world. The boy is, as it were, well, he's not even shown here. It's almost like reality itself is reborn, and in this kind of renaissance or new life or new birth, there's often a sense of a kind of a great unburdening, a great letting go. So there's a sort of a sense of a rising, a newness, a coming, but at the same time, a kind of a release. And the boy is totally immersed in this flow of reality. And here, there's often a sense of great relief. Many people cry when they come into this stage. Sometimes they cry because it's always been here, and it's just this little bit of a shift of perspective, and suddenly they realize it. Sometimes they cry because, well, they've been lost for so long, and now they know that they're home. Now they know that the teachers from the past were speaking the truth and making clear that this was a worthwhile path to walk. Sometimes people can't stop laughing at this stage. Frequently, people are laughing and crying at the same time. There can be a kind of a sort of a catharsis. Nevertheless, as we mentioned earlier on, with all of this work, yes, there are experiences which arise and pass along the way, but this that we find along the way is not itself an experience. Every experience is time bound. It comes, it stays, it goes. But what we get, certainly by this stage, is not in itself an experience. Although, as I say, there can be catharses, not always. Sometimes it can be very quiet, very peaceful, a kind of a, oh, I'm home, kind of very gentle, very easy sometimes. But the experience bit, that always has a time component. It wears off. But what doesn't wear off here is a shift in the way we relate to all experiences. It's like something has changed and doesn't change back. So it's a little bit like, I often, with my own students, say, it's a bit like when you were 7 years old or so, where you kind of got it that Father Christmas really doesn't exist. And once you've got that, it really doesn't matter how many Christmas cards with jolly red, characters on them, or wrapping paper, or people in department stores in red suits or whatever. You're vanishingly unlikely to start believing in Father Christmas again. You don't have to keep reminding yourself that Father Christmas doesn't exist. You don't need a Father Christmas mantra. You just know. And this is similar. When you've got it, you've just got it. It's yours. And so this shift in the way that we relate to all experiences is depicted by just a simple picture of things as they are. The mountains are green, the waters are blue, simple as that. And then this leads on to our next stage. So here we have a kind of a sort of a maturing of the process. So the fat, jolly person is the ox herding boy, if you like, who's now sort of put on a few years and put on a few pounds, like most of us. And he's, as it were, now become a teacher, because anybody who walks this way and has lived experience of this is able to help others. So in that sense, becomes a teacher. And so he's, as it were, introducing the way to somebody new, the next person, as it were, to take this journey. But then there's also an inner dimension to this as well. When we've, as it were, walked this journey, when we've been through these stages, after a bit, we realize that there's still more to do. And so the, if you like, the voice of experience is, as it were, passing on to the new cowherd boy, or the cowherd boy within us, that there's still further to go. And so actually this series of 10 becomes a cycle. And we actually go around the cycle a number of times. And the thing about it is, having done it once, going around again is easier, typically. For most of us, the bull is at its most coarse, at its most ebullient, if you like, on that first time around. Often we're dealing with more subtle suffering on a second, third, subsequent times around. But the journey continues. The journey continues. The cycle carries on. There's no actual finish point. And we start to shift our perception. First time round, there's very much a goal orientation. We think, if only I can get to the stage of the empty circle, if only I can get to that beautiful peace that the journey promises. But then we start to realize by the time we get to this stage, or we're going around again, that actually all of it is a journey of awakening. Even the rough stuff, even the painful, difficult memories or physical symptoms that we're going through, or the confusion, all of it is part of this one beautiful, cyclical journey of awakening that potentially becomes more and more refined as we go on. And so we have a roadmap for a journey that's as long as life itself, I suspect. Now, we have the Buddha's word that this journey can be utterly completed, that it can be completely finished. And I'm sure he's telling us the truth there. But most of us, certainly speaking personally, very much still got, miles to go before I sleep, as the poet has it. And so the roadmap remains useful. And so this sort of, if you like, this architecture of the path, as we've looked at it just now, is the sort of thing that my teacher would explain to us, his students, and also the people from the surrounding area who'd be trying to make sense of the suffering in their lives. So I thought it might be useful to you. I'm not a great specialist in this, but I might be able to, to put in some more details. I know Udayan's been through this in probably a lot more depth and detail with you, and I'd be very, very happy if he'd be willing to chime in as well. If anybody's got any points or reflections or questions around any of this.
Well, first of all, Venerable Daizan, thank you very much. It's wonderful, and I think one of the themes you repeated is that people either give up or they think they've got it at a premature stage, and you've spoken in tremendous humility, and it's so important to remind ourselves. And it is very sad when you see people like that, don't you? And they've obviously got stuck at a certain stage, and they go around whatever, and quite often misguiding others. So it's a very important point, and thank you so much. And the bit about the cycle continues, and it's never ending. The Buddha Dharma is trackless and vast. It's endless, and I vow to tread it to the end, one of our 4 vows, isn't it? So there's a lot to talk about there, but please, has anybody got any questions? It's a wonderful opportunity for us to have Venerable Daizan, who, as I said, has trained in the traditional way in both traditions of Zen. So please, here's your opportunity to ask any questions, but go ahead, please.
No question. Well, if it would be more convenient, I'd be delighted to come back next week, and we could have more of a discussion about it. If that would be, if people would prefer to have a little time to look into this and so on. Udayan's first Zen teacher wrote a whole book about this spiritual journey, and that's probably a very good resource and reference for this. That's is it Zen and the Gentling of the Bull? Is that right?
There are 2 publications. It's called Gentling the Bull. Gentling the Bull, the 10 Bull Pictures, A Spiritual Journey. The Zen Center does have another publication called The Bull and His Herdsman, but that's by Zen Master Otsu, a Japanese master, and his teishos, his talks given in the 60s. But this is the one that's by my teacher, Venerable Miyokuni. It's also interesting to note that your book, the one you mentioned, Practical Zen, that also has a chapter devoted to this talk, and it's a very, very informative chapter to start the process of before you go into the small print, so to speak. So and that book you know, is well worth a read, so I would recommend that very much. And as I said, I think it'll be very good for some of you people, if you're interested, to look at the zenways.org website, and there are lots of talks there. I'm really grateful, Venerable Daizan, that you've kindly offered to come back next week or whenever, because it gives an opportunity for people to come up with issues in their practice and whatever, and then sort of take that on and respond to those issues. So that's very, very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, not at all. Delighted, delighted. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, the other thing I would say is, you know, those of you in London, or if you're coming into London, please go and check out Venerable Daizan's centre. It's not just Zen. He does a lot of other things. He trains yoga instructors. It's all mind-body thing. So it's not just the mental side of my meditation, my Zen, my this. It's actually incorporating the body, which I think is a very well, it distinguishes your centre from many other centres, I would say. We're privileged to have an authentic Western English Zen master in Britain. I mean, there are very few of them in Europe and generally. And for you to do what you're doing is really amazing. And now that we're opening up, I'm sure you'd be very happy to have some people from our groups here.
Delighted, delighted, and certainly in those rough bits of the journey, I've found having an embodied physical practice seems to really help people to come through it more gracefully, more smoothly, which is our primary reason why. Well, I found it so useful myself on my own practice to work with the body. So I made it a bit of a thread through the years to seek out embodied and physical temple-based practices around the Zen world, and that's the backbone of what we share in terms of the physical stuff.
That's right. It's wonderful that I mean, the Zen tradition traditionally always emphasizes the body, doesn't it? Especially when the passions are flaring. We take a deep breath, we make ourselves bigger so that the body can help us to contain those negative energies, isn't it? And I mean, Buddhism does, all Buddhism does, but I think in Zen is particularly emphasized. That's why the straight sitting, the upright posture. And in English, we have the same phrase, don't we? Pull yourself together, man.
Pull yourself together.
Pull yourself together, literally. So it is there in the West. And the other thing I'd like to mention whilst we're here is your comments about being with a teacher, being in a traditional training school or whatever is so important, isn't it? Because precisely because of what you said, those pitfalls. I'm very grateful that you actually pointed out the various pitfalls, because this is where people either stop or get stuck, or they actually can end up damaging themselves, can't they? Because things will come up. The demons always come up before the angels, and that's when the teacher is essential, because the teacher has gone through it all and knows how to, you know, help the student. And I think in the West, thankfully, it's improving because there are lots more centers now, but there is an emphasis to do it all on my own.
There is, isn't there?
And that's not the traditional Eastern way. As you know from your own training, you don't get to meditate for many years. You have to sweep the courtyard or wash the dishes or do mundane things, you know, so it is important to be mindful of that. And I think it's wonderful that, you know, Venerable Daizan, I know, is very open and is very willing to help people. So if there are issues or whatever, I'm sure Venerable Daizan would be more than happy to address them. So thank you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon, Venerable Daizan, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.